On July 20, 1969, the lunar module of the Apollo 11 mission landed on the Moon, with two astronauts, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. Neil Armstrong opened the door, came out of it, and became the first man on the Moon. As it was a narrow passage, an important component of this module, the ascent engine arming switch, got damaged. Without this switch, the module would not be able to take off from the surface of the Moon, and they could not return to the Earth again. But, did it actually happen? Even after 50 years of this Moon landing incident, many people refuse to believe that humans have gone to the Moon. It is claimed that the entire Apollo 11 mission was just a drama, orchestrated by America to show its advantage over the USSR. They filmed it in a studio on Earth and lied to the world. Going beyond it, they gave some valid reasons for their claims. In the footage of the Moon landing, how was the flag fluttering in the absence of atmosphere on the Moon? Why are the stars not showing up in photos taken by Armstrong and Aldrin? Why is there a difference in the pattern of their footprints on the Moon and their actual spacesuit shoe? And why is there an inconsistency in the angles of the shadows? Were there many lights installed, as in studios? Who was filming them while they were departing from the lunar module? Was this a conspiracy? So, let's discuss. After the end of World War II, a new type of tussle started between America and the Soviet Union, commonly known as the Cold War. Due to this, both countries were engaged in a space race. In 1957, the Soviet Union became the first country to launch an artificial satellite named Sputnik, the first man-made object to be placed in the Earth's orbit. It was a big shock to America. Next year, in 1958, America too launched its first satellite, the Explorer. But just after 3 years, the US got another big shock as the Soviet cosmonaut, Yuri Gagarin, became the first person to go to space. But by this time, America had already resolved to do something extraordinary.
I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the Moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
On May 25, 1961, the US president openly promised the world that they would send humans to the Moon and get them back on Earth before the end of this decade. This was an unbelievable announcement for many. Imagine the year 1961, no smartphones, no GPS or navigation, no internet. People were questioning how it would be possible. For the next 5 years, about $7 to $9 billion were provided to the space program. Many unmanned tests were carried out in the period between 1963 and 1967. The first manned mission was planned in February 1967. A mission in which astronauts will go to space in a spacecraft. This was the first Apollo mission. But during the rehearsal test on January 27, 1967, the cabin of this mission caught fire, and all 3 astronauts preparing to go to space got killed. After this accident, the strategy again turned towards unmanned missions. All the missions up to Apollo 6 were conducted unmanned. In October 1968, the Apollo 7 mission was launched, and again, it was a manned mission that was highly successful. 2 months later, in December 1968, mission Apollo 8 was launched, in which 3 astronauts were sent near the Moon. 3 months later, in March 1969, mission Apollo 9 was launched, in which a lunar module was tested. The lunar module was the main component that would land on the Moon's surface. Just 2 months later, in May 1969, mission Apollo 10 was carried out. In this mission, almost everything was done except landing on the moon. All these developments culminated in their next mission.
Six, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff.
And finally, on July 16, 1969, Apollo 11 launched from Cape Kennedy, carrying 3 astronauts: Neil Armstrong, the mission leader; Michael Collins, the command module's pilot; and Edwin Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module's pilot. The Apollo 11 mission spacecraft had 3 main parts: command module, service module, and lunar module. Only the third one, the lunar module, would be detached from the spacecraft and land on the moon. A Saturn V rocket was used to launch this spacecraft. It took less than 10 minutes to reach the Earth's orbit and made about 1.5 revolutions around the Earth. After getting permission and clearance from the mission control, they ejected from Earth's orbit and started traveling towards the moon's orbit. It took a few days to reach the moon. On July 19, 1969, after traveling for almost 4 lakh kilometers, the Apollo 11 spacecraft entered the moon's orbit. At this point, the lunar module detached from the command and service module, commonly known as Columbia. The Columbia was being operated by Michael Collins, while the lunar module, nicknamed as Eagle, was carrying Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin. The Columbia was supposed to remain in the moon's orbit, revolving around the moon, while the Eagle was tasked with landing on the moon. At a height of 150 meters, Neil Armstrong interrupted the automatic mode and took over control as he saw that the landing surface was too uneven with huge boulders. They decided on another spot for landing, 4 miles away from the predetermined landing spot. They were left with only 5% of the fuel. Mission Control initiated a countdown to decide whether to land on the moon or not.
Lights on. Forward. Forward. 40 feet down, 2.5. Picking up some dust. Straight shadow. 4 forward, drifting to the right a little. 30 seconds forward, just. Contact light.
But at the last minute, Neil Armstrong sent a radio message to Earth.
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Neil Armstrong opened the door and stepped on the moon, becoming the first man to step on the moon, followed by Buzz Aldrin. About 65 million people were watching this miracle happen on television. They remained on the moon's surface for almost 2.5 hours, collecting samples and taking photographs. A television camera was set up to transmit signals to the Earth. A solar wind composition experiment, a lunar laser ranging experiment to measure the distance between the moon and Earth at any given point of time. A passive seismometer. In total, about 23 kilograms of samples were collected. The thing they left behind was an American flag, a plate with the inscription, "Here men from the planet Earth first set foot upon the moon, July 1969 AD, we came in peace for all mankind." After that, the Eagle would have to take off from the surface of the moon and reattach to the Columbia, and for this, the engine had to be turned on. But as we mentioned in the beginning, the ascent engine arming switch, the switch that was used to turn the engine on, had been damaged. At this point, Buzz Aldrin played an important role. He used his metal pen to bypass the circuit, and the engine was started. Finally, the lunar module Eagle reunited with the orbiter Columbia. The 3 astronauts turned the spacecraft toward Earth. this was a very risky operation. The chances of these 3 astronauts returning were too low, and even US President Nixon had prepared an alternate speech in case of their deaths. And the lines written were, "Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace." But, thankfully, it wasn't needed. After entering the Earth's atmosphere, the command module detached from the service module, and all 3 safely landed on the Earth. They were quarantined for 2 weeks and weren't allowed to be in contact with other humans because of the risk of them carrying pathogens, viruses, or bacteria that they might have encountered on the moon and that could possibly wreak havoc on Earth. But again, thankfully, nothing of the sort happened.
Achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the Earth.
But isn't it very suspicious? The US president announced that this would happen by the end of the decade, and just a year before that, it actually happened. Was it a pre-cooked fake moon landing plan by the US to show its technological supremacy over the USSR in the Cold War? This is just one suspicion, along with many, which led to some. According to the 3rd edition of the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, published in the 1970s, the moon landing was said to be factual multiple times. If it was a fake attempt by America to fool the world, the Soviets would never have acknowledged it. But why was the flag fluttering in the absence of air on the moon? There is a simple reason for that. NASA was already aware of the fact that, in the absence of air, the flag would never flutter. So they designed this flag differently. They put a horizontal rod on top so that the flag would always be extended out and properly visible. But during the Apollo mission, there were some problems extending this horizontal rod. So it couldn't be extended to the end, which caused a ripple that we see and caused apparent waving. The flag is fluttering only in the videos where the astronauts are holding it and making it move. But after that, it remains still. Another question people ask is, why are the stars not visible in the photos taken by astronauts on the moon? Actually, the moon landing took place during the day. Sunlight was hitting the moon's surface, and the photos were getting overexposed. This caused the cameras to ignore tiny details in the darker parts. Another conspiracy theory talks about the inconsistency in the angles of shadows. It is claimed by many that, as it was being recorded in a Hollywood studio, there were multiple sources of artificial light. But in reality, the surface of the moon was also acting as a complementary source of light, as it was reflecting so much light coming from the sun. Because of this, light scattered, and the shadows were so bizarre. Another question that is raised by many is, in the photo of Buzz Aldrin taken by Armstrong, which shows Armstrong's reflection, you can see that there is no camera in his hand. Then who was taking that picture? How could it be possible? But it could be. Because the camera was mounted on his suit. But then, who took the photos of Neil Armstrong departing from the lunar module? Again, a simple answer. There were multiple cameras installed on the lunar module itself to record them. But what about the mismatch of their foot marks on the moon with their actual spacesuit shoes? This is because they put on another pair of overshoe sleeves on their spacesuit shoes while descending from the lunar module. And that shoes were specially designed for this purpose.